Yeah, that would be Saturday. Yeah, yeah. But I know if there's a hike, I think there's a hike with those reasons. Like that. Yeah.
All right, good morning. Looks like the rain's coming, right? It's starting to drizzle a little bit out there. My phone said 100% chance of rain for the rest of the day. So we should at least get some drizzle. Okay, we'll see what happens. Right? Hopefully everyone's doing well. We'll keep going with our topic today. We have like a couple more slides to finish up with chapter 3, and then we'll move on to chapter 7. As a side note, we went to KFC for dinner, if you were curious, right? It was okay, right? Because my kids voted for it. We're like, when in doubt, we're always like, what do you guys want to do, right? But as a side note, I was thinking of all of you as we went out to dinner. I was all like, I got to remember to tell them. We ended up going to KFC, right? After we couldn't decide, that's what the kids picked. Anyway, so we left off here. We talked a lot about like some of the gendered communication patterns, just a little bit more about like self-disclosure, and then some communication patterns in unsuccessful relationships, and then we'll move to falling in love from there. So one thing that's talked about a lot in our textbook and just in general when it comes to relationships is how much do we disclose and when, right? And I always think I should find this clip from, if any of you saw the movie Baby Mama. She goes on a date in the beginning, and if you share way too much too quickly, people will run. If you don't share enough quick enough, people will run, right? So it tends to be kind of a delicate balance. Like I think it was like a first date, and she's like, I want kids, I want to do this, I want to do this. And the guy like takes off and says he's going to the bathroom, and then you see him getting in a cab leaving, right? And so oftentimes what we see is we have kind of this delicate dance that we have to do in terms of how much do we tell somebody when we first meet them. Because you have to start to reveal yourself and kind of share more and more and get to know people. But again, not enough or too much too quickly can be a little bit of a problem. So we sometimes call this the onion theory of communication, right? That when we first meet someone, we tend to kind of reveal ourselves in layers, like you would see with an onion, right? We start with the shallow kind of on the surface stuff. As we get to know someone better, you reveal a little bit more and a little bit more. You might start talking about your sexual history and preferences and relationships along with everything else. And maybe not so much the first bullet here, but we do this with friendships too, right? When you meet new people, kind of start shallow and then you get a little bit deeper and deeper as your relationship starts to grow. But when we talk about romantic relationships, there are a couple of things that are really important to talk about. Right. And we need to like learn how to make requests and share this information and have empathy and disclosure and all this stuff. But it can be, again, a little bit of a delicate balance and something a lot of people don't feel comfortable talking about. When it comes to talking about your sexual history and what you like and don't like, this isn't the most comfortable conversation that people love to have. Most people don't like to think about somebody's like exes or partners that they've had in the past. But if you don't talk about these things with a partner, then you're kind of flying blind in a way, right? You're assuming that they like certain things or don't like certain things based on your past experience or your assumptions about them. And it can sometimes lead to some issues. So as awkward as these conversations are, it's really important to have them with partners, right? I like X or I don't like X, or this is what I'm into or not into. And I have like the perfect clip for this. It's super awkward, like the most awkward dinner conversation, but it leads to a really good conversation between this couple. If you've ever seen the movie I Love You, Man, there's a great scene in there about like preferences for oral sex. And they never have this conversation. And then it comes out at like an awkward dinner party and then later in the car. So let me play this for you. And I think it's a really great example of that, right? The look that he gives when like she mentions her ex, that like grimace that he gives is so typical of how I think people tend to feel about talking about like exes and intimacy in that way. but so important, right? They never talked about it. And so she's just assuming that he feels the same way that her ex did and hasn't like done oral sex with him, and they're about to get married and so on. And they have this conversation because it comes up because of a friend. So as awkward as it is, it's really important not only to reveal about yourself personally, but what are your preferences sexually? What are some of the things that you're into or not? And having that like empathy for each other. So it's an important piece of communication in relationships, even if it's not always the most comfortable piece to include. One other thing in this chapter, I love this picture. It looks like she's going to eat him, right? She's just about to like eat him or something. But Gottman and Gottman, two very famous therapists who are known for their work with couples. They're a husband and wife duo. So Gottman and Gottman have done, I forget how many couples at this point they've worked with. It's in the thousands. Right? But what they did is after working with thousands and thousands of couples, they came up with what they called the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, right? Kind of that reference to the Bible, right? Of like the end of the world, the end of times, the end of a relationship is kind of how they mean it here. And what they said is if they saw these 4 horsemen in a relationship, that it almost always signaled that if they didn't do anything to fix it, the relationship would end, right? So if you have some of these things, you can fix it, but they need to be addressed and fixed, or it was something like 90-something% of the time, it signaled the end of the relationship would happen, right? So these are kind of unsuccessful communication patterns that we might see. One of them is criticism. Now, if you're doing these, like it happens every now and then, or you like address it and fix it, it's not a huge deal, but doing these a lot or having your communication be marked by these is problematic. So criticism is when you attack your partner's like personality or character. You do a lot of like, you always do X, or you never do X, like overgeneralizations like that, right? You never listen to me. You always put yourself first. Right? Whenever you speak in like overgeneralizations and criticize like that, it tends to be taken very poorly, and it leads to defensiveness, which is another one of the ones that are up here. These ones, they kind of tend to fuel each other. Contempt is when you insult or intend to like harm a partner, right? So your body language or tone, maybe you would like have name calling or hostility, right, toward a partner. Those things tend to be problematic. Bless you. Defensiveness, when you always see yourself as the victim. Really hard when somebody is talking to you and voicing concerns to just listen and not jump in with your own stuff and get defensive, right? And we all do it to a degree, but kind of being marked by that defensiveness and always seeing yourself as the victim. You're the one who did it. That's not true. It's you, not me, right? That can sometimes be problematic. And then stonewalling, when you withdraw from the like the relationship as a way to avoid conflict. And so maybe that's like the silent treatment, or putting up, we always joke, it's like, call it the Elsa wall, like a frozen wall, like between you and the other person. There's nothing wrong with taking a little space to like calm down or process things. But if you refuse to talk, if you put up a wall and wall your partner out, which we call stonewalling, that can also be a problematic pattern. So finding ways to not do these things is really important, according to Gottman and Gottman. Otherwise, it could signal the end of times or the end of days for relationships. So these are 4 things that they said if they saw all 4 of them, they could predict with a lot of certainty that that relationship would end if nothing was changed. So lots of things related to like communication with gender and within relationships, and we'll build on that in the next chapter. But any other thoughts, comments, anything else interesting here? Some of you who came in late, I told everyone that I went to KFC for dinner, and it was an important piece of information for me to share. Right? Yeah.
Exactly, but both partners in the relationship up to like G, they go into brainwaves. It's like very science-based.
Yeah.
Saying how in depth they've been over like 4 decades. But it's brain patterns. It's not just like if you say this, it will, react like that. It's if this happens, they will physically and mentally have this type of chemical.
Yeah.
That would do this. It's nuts.
They're really great researchers, right? I love that you mentioned it. It's very like research and biology based, in addition to like the experience of like all the people that they just interviewed and worked with. Really interesting, like duo. And when I took my couples counseling class as part of my MFT program, it was a lot of like interviewing and working off of these premises. Really, really interesting. And they have several books that are interesting that they wrote as well, if you want to know more. But yeah, very like biologically based at times as well. Anything else before we move to the next chapter? You ready to fall in love? Get sappy, right? Okay. We go. I always say I'm too sappy, right? They're like, you're too sappy. I'm like, sorry. All right. One of my kids is very sappy. We're very similar. We just hug each other all the time, right? My other two are like, you again. They're like in that preteen stage. So like, I made the mistake of saying hi to my daughter at like a volleyball game, and she like had that like, don't talk to me over there. I forget you're almost 12, right? I have to adjust. But what we'll talk about here, we'll talk about love and intimacy, types of love, right? Lots of different types. I have a kind of a fun love inventory that I'll give you that you can take to look at the different types of love that you might use or have. And then some issues and maintaining satisfaction and so on. So I have some images here of people who looked like they were in love, right? And then I have a little love montage that I want to play for you. It's just a collection somebody else made of like scenes from movies and things of people falling in love, just to get us into the frame of mind here. So let me play this for you. It's just a couple of minutes, but I think it's kind of a nice of different types of love, right? And different examples of love, which I think is amazing. And what we'll do from here is we'll talk about some of those different components that are involved in love, right? And what is it, right? Love is something that's really difficult to define. And the reason for that is because it can mean different things to different people. There are a lot of different types of love. Here's our definition, right? So unsatisfactory. It's a special attitude with behavioral and emotional components. That sounds so sad, right? A special attitude, right? But there are just so many different types. It's difficult to measure, it's difficult to identify, it's difficult to define, but it is a huge source of meaning and connection for so many people, right? It's something that drives a lot of our life, a lot of our meaning, and the connections that we have with others, right? A lot of people have studied it. We'll look at some of those theorists. There's a couple of different big theories about the different types of love. So that's where we'll go from here. One of the biggest basic distinctions in terms of types of love is this one. It's kind of a two-prong theory here. So we either have romantic or passionate love, or we have what's called companionate or conjugal love. And so very like oversimplified version here, but romantic or passionate love tends to also be known as like infatuation, right? It's that beginning of a relationship. You might not even know the person yet, right? But you feel those feelings of like love and infatuation toward them. We could say instead of love at first sight, it's more like infatuation at first sight, right? Because you don't necessarily know them very well. It's very intense. There's a lot of sexual and like passionate desire. You don't tend to have a lot of conflict. They make you feel complete, right? And you feel like everything's going to be perfect. You love them. They're perfect for you. This is like a 3 to 7 month period of time that people tend to feel these feelings of romantic or passionate love. Again, very short-lived, very passion-driven, and tends to be the beginning of a relationship. And we'll talk more about the chemical elements of love, but there's kind of an interesting point between these two, not only chemically, but also psychologically, where you either have to transition here or the relationship kind of tends to end and fizzle out. 3 to 7 months is a very common like period of time for the breakups to occur. And part of that is chemical, again, which we'll get to. And the other part of it is this, right? You have to transition to more like companionate or conjugal love in order for a relationship to last. As you get to know somebody more, you start to develop that friendly affection and deep attachment for them. You love them and know them and accept them despite their shortcomings, or maybe even love them for their shortcomings or things that are maybe challenges, right? It's more enduring than passionate love. And you can still have passion and everything as part of this. In fact, I would say you have to have it to some degree, but it's a transition. Right? And so a lot of relationships, again, like 3 to 7 months, that they have their first fight. You start to get to know them a little bit. Things either get serious or they don't. right? And if you don't transition here, oftentimes then those relationships will start to kind of fall apart. And again, we'll talk more about the chemical reason for that in a little bit. Another really popular theory adds a third element. So this one is Sternberg's triangular theory of romance or like love. It says there are three components to love: passion, intimacy, and commitment. Right, so three different elements, and then they can combine together to create different types of love, depending on which one you have. Right, so if you just have liking alone, right, like intimacy alone, it'd be liking. If you have intimacy and commitment, it's more like companionate love. Empty love is when you're just committed to someone, but you don't maybe have that passion anymore. Infatuation is the beginning where it's just like passion alone. Fatuous love, passion and commitment. And then there's like the holy grail in the middle of consummate love, where you have intimacy, passion, and commitment together. So Sternberg just kind of added a little bit, saying that passion is something that starts out very, very strong, and then it tends to fade a little bit. But as it starts to fade, intimacy and commitment start to build. Right? And you have to find ways to keep that passion, but you also have to add the intimacy and commitment. Otherwise, you don't get that consummate love in the middle. Right. And so again, we end up with these kind of interesting combinations of different elements of the triangular theory together to create different types of love, with the ideal form being that consummate love in the middle. All right, so here we've added one more element. And then there's one more really big theory that we'll talk about on the next slide. But any thoughts, questions, anything so far before I keep going, just to check. All right, so one more type. John Allen Lee proposed that there's something called the colors of love. And this one, we have these 6 different types of love that we can end up with. Eros, Ludos, Storge, Mania, Pragma, and Agape. And I have, I kind of put this together myself. It's not an official quiz, but I think it's pretty accurate and it's really interesting. So what I'm going to give you is I created this little like colors of love quiz, but I want to give you a couple of just like suggestions before you take it. First, I think you need to kind of take a stance when you take this quiz. So either think about your ideal, you can think about a past relationship, or you can think about a current relationship. But if you bounce around between all of those, your results are going to be reflecting that a little bit. So if you're in a relationship right now, you can think about the relationship you're in. If you aren't, you can think about a past one or what you would like it to be, right? An ideal relationship if you haven't had one. So kind of think about that as you go. And what you're going to do with each, you're going to read through each statement and you're going to read it between 5 and 1, and then add up your score for each section. And then we can talk about what it means afterward. But I'm not collecting this. This is just for you. And it should be stapled together. It's one of the color parts. If you're missing a page, don't need them. So other than once again, you're just going to rate each statement and then add up your score for each section. Yeah. That's one. And again, when you finish each section, create like add up and get your total score for each section. A couple more minutes, somebody to talk about it. Let's.
thought about the research about stereotype theory. If you mentioned that like passion gradually goes down. So I wonder, is there any like scientific like pathways to ignite passion?
Yeah, so when we get to the chemicals of love in a few minutes, there, yeah, we could talk about that a little bit. Yeah, for sure. And you have to, I think, in some ways, in order to keep that like fire, right? If it's important to you. Yeah. All right, so done or not, let's talk about this a little bit. So not very complicated in terms of scoring. The higher your score, the more like you that type of love is. The lower your score, the less like you that type of love is. And so in general, you might have one type that's like really high. You might have a couple that are really high. You might have one that's really low or a couple that are really low. How many people like clearly have like one dominant type of love style by show of hands? Right? How many of you have a couple or at least like two that are close? Right? Three. So I have three that are the exact same. Like 28, 28, 28. So Eros, Mania, and Agape. So if you want to know the kind of person I am romantic, crazy, and selfless. Hopefully that balances the other two out. Well, crazy part out, right? All three of mine were like 28, right? All three of them. And then I have some that are really low. Like I'm clearly not a Ludos like kind of person because my score was like really, really low. Right. And so if it's a really high score, that indicates it tends to be somewhat like you, or that tends to be the way that you love someone. If it's really low, not like you. And if you have a couple, it might depend on the relationship. It might depend on the partner. And what's interesting is this can sometimes change depending on how long you've been with someone. So like my partner and I have been together a very like long time, like 20 or 21 years in August. And it's interesting, the longer we've been together, the higher like my score day, like score goes up, right? And so it's interesting how this could change from relationship to relationship and also over time. Yeah.
But I had a friendship.
Okay.
Really codependent, toxic friendship. And Mania, like almost all of I'm a very like, I don't know, I consider myself a very like chill
Sure.
person, but this person, the Mania one, it made me feel like completely that way. What do you think about it?
Yeah, so sometimes,
It only happened once in my life.
okay, like kind of rubbing off on you a little bit, or is that what you mean? Or?
But then suddenly with this person, you know, I was like, we were completely codependent on each other.
Sure.
And it was very like, I felt like if I wasn't around them all the time, that I was like, I couldn't like go on and stuff like that. But I had never felt that way about a person before. So I wonder where that comes from.
It's interesting how different people can bring out different parts of who we are. Right. And so it might be that you have a partner and like the two of you kind of meet and like meld a little bit. And that can be a good thing or a bad thing, right? Or it could be neutral. It could just kind of just be what it is. But it's very common that different people bring out different sides of us, even in friendships, right? Like think about the friendships and the people in your life. You might be slightly different with different people. Right. Like I have friends where I'm really like laid back and they're fun. And then I have friends where it just like never feels comfortable, like ever, but I enjoy their company. It just never feels like relaxed, you know? And then again, like the longer I've been with my partner, the more my scores kind of shift. If I had taken this 20 years ago, they'd be very different than they are now. So I actually think that's really normal, right? And if you were to take this test again, but think about somebody else, you might have different scores. Right, which is why I wanted you to kind of pick one. I mean, any other thoughts on that? As you think about your scores and what came up for this, what do you think? Does it reflect your relationships? Any patterns or anything interesting that you had thoughts about? Yeah,
I think if you had a certain person in mind, I feel like this reflects what relationship you kind of had with them.
sure.
So it makes you kind of like question, okay, was this really a good relationship? Not giving the scores.
Okay. Interesting, right? Somebody else feel that way a little bit too? Any other, yeah, you're nodding. Any other thoughts, comments? How many of you would be comfortable showing this to your partner, your scores? That's amazing, right? Anyone have that like, I'm gonna fold this, put this in my pocket and throw it away right now, right? I did that a little bit, and then I was like, nah, I could explain everything that I wrote, right? I always hesitate to say this. I'm gonna put it out there anyway. I have some extras. If you would like to take them a copy home and have your partner fill it out. And you're like, right, as long as you are open to what they say. I had a couple, oh, this is like 10 years ago at this point, that broke up because of this. Obviously, there were issues before this, but it brought everything to the surface. It led to disagreement and they broke up and she was so mad at me. And I was like, I told you to, like, I'm sorry, right? Like, I felt really bad. But obviously, like, it's not like it was my fault, but I still felt that. But if you are interested and open to what your partner has to say, I have some extras and you may take them with you if you would like. I think it's really interesting. And again, if you were to consider taking it again, and think of something else, maybe it's your ideal or a past relationship, I guarantee your scores would probably be a little bit different. This tends to be something that changes over time, and it's a little oversimplified. There's nothing wrong with being more than one of these, but the way that you love people tends to be very shaped by your past and very shaped by things like attachment when you were younger. Now, what's interesting is you could be very different types of lovers and work out fine. Some don't tend to work as well. And I imagine you can kind of see that. Like if you have somebody who's a very like selfless lover, they might not do so great with like a game playing lover, right? Or somebody who likes things to be very like calm and quiet and practical versus somebody who's more of like a game player or maybe more like crazy and manic in the way that they love. But that doesn't mean it can't work out, right? Like my partner, I had her take it, and she is much more like selfless and practical and quiet and calm. Like we're like opposite except for the selfless piece. But like it works for us. It's fine. And what's interesting is different types tend to attract each other. And I have these two really cool books that I wanted to share with you. If this is something you want to know more about. So there's a ton of books on this topic, but I think these are two really good ones. So the first one is called Attached. It's really popular. You have the book, it's a great book, and it's all about different styles of attachment and how they shape who we love, right? And how we react in our relationships. So there tend to be interesting patterns that emerge where you get somebody who is very like avoidant versus somebody who is maybe disorganized. Our attachment styles with our parents can shape the way that we attach and love partners when we're older. And the other one, kind of a similar idea, but it's called How We Love. Another one here, and they have all of them have quizzes that go with them. I like the quizzes, I think they're fun. A lot of people enjoy taking them. But they talk about how different patterns of love can kind of interact with each other. So I'll pass these around. You also have another here with it. But I would recommend both of these. Are both really like interesting reads. The Attached one is a little more scientific, in that they use a lot of research-based stuff to fuel their stuff, versus the other one is a little more like counseling based. But they're both really great. And they talk a little bit about like these different types of love and how they are very much shaped by the relationships we had with our parents as kids, right? Which is a little weird to think about, but it's so directly connected. And I think they're both great books for that. Any other like thoughts about this? I mean, any other like general reactions? You said you would never give it to a partner, right? Or like
Never. I
hesitate.
I would hesitate just for the reason that I don't want someone to be dishonest about with certain questions.
Sure.
Because there's certain questions where it's just like let's say like Eros, for example. It's like I feel like there's certain questions where it's like that's more of a conversation than just putting a score down. And
right.
I feel like just having the score, it's like the first thing you see is
the score, right?
Yeah,
the number.
well, like even if you put like for let's say like 3 or 7, like you put like a 4 instead of 5, it's like you're gonna be like, it's like not a 5 or something.
Right.
Like, and then it's like it's better to have that more of a like conversation form than first like having the number and then doing the conversation, because the number sticks in your head more.
It definitely can, right? And it can very much shape like, well, why'd you put 4 instead of 5, right? Or why'd you put 2 instead of 3, right? It can very easily have that reaction to it.
Because even if like you do have a good explanation,
Yeah.
it's just like, but you put that knowing that.
Right. And then maybe over time.
Source. I think what would be fun more so is like instead of being like explicitly what you scored on each thing, more so like the larger categories, like, oh, I got this on this
Mhm.
category, or it's like these were ranking your categories with your partner after you
Yeah.
did the test, but not like showing them each thing you scored.
Right. Let's come together and talk about what we ended up with, but not how we got there, right?
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
Actually what made me not be in the friendship anymore.
Sure.
Because I was like, I'm not happy. Like, when I feel like I'm constantly consumed by somebody else's being, I don't feel happy.
Mm.
I need to be independent. I have an avoidant attachment style. I like thrive on independence.
Sure.
And so when I was completely dependent on this person, my attachment style shifted to an anxious one. So you would probably say my overall attachment style is disorganized because it switches between both.
Or
but-
anxious avoidant. Yeah.
Yeah. So I realized that like I just wasn't happy. And you know, we parted amicably. It wasn't like I hate you, you make me feel bad. It was like I don't feel good, but it's not really your fault.
Mhm.
You know, there's things that both of us could work on, and we just need to meet up at different points in our life. I'm happy with either of those things.
But it's wonderful insight to have, right? And let different people, like, okay, this is changing the way that I feel. And it's not necessarily in a way that makes me comfortable, and to know that and see that, I think requires a lot of reflection and insight. So I think that's really powerful in of itself to know. Yeah, it is a really good book, and it's not expensive at all. I mean, I got it on. There was a hand over somewhere. Yeah.
Doing this with like I think like there's like a big combination of like not really wanting to know. Like, especially if you like have an idea that like maybe they feel like a little differently about you than you feel about them. Sure. It's like for me personally, I'm like, I don't think I need to know your feelings. Just because like I don't know, like I just because it would like open up a whole like thing that would negative.
Yeah, and again, I think it's good that you know that, right? Like, I think when you know those things, it's good, right? When you know that, like, maybe I don't want to see your specific answers. And with my partner, I didn't want to see her specific answers because I didn't want my feelings to be hurt of like, what do you mean you weren't instantly attracted to me when you first met me? Like I was to you, like fight. Like we don't actually fight a whole lot anymore, which is nice. Like we learn to like navigate that. Which took years, right? But like, I know that about myself. Like, I don't want to see your score, but let's talk about the types. And I already know what type of woman she is. Like, I know her well, right? So I think knowing yourself, like a couple of you are saying, is a really important piece of relationships and love in general. Was that it? Did you have oh, I thought you put your hand up. No. Any other like thoughts or comments? Anything in general else about this? At all? Yeah.
I just have a question on the book because I was looking.
Yeah.
through it. I saw there was a little bit of mention of like religion.
Yeah.
So I wonder how big of the book that puts me off because I don't really.
It definitely, so they have a little bit more of like a Christian undertone to it, but it's not in any way like overbearing. But it is definitely there. And I think you can see it really quickly like you did. I still think it's really mostly neutral. But there is a little bit of an undertone of it, and it's very like heterosexually focused versus attached is a little more broad and neutral. So yeah. Yeah, I think it's honestly, I think it's a little more approachable and like generalizable anyway. Of the two, I would say it's the better book. But the other one is nice in its own way, but it does have some religious undertones to it. Yeah, of course. Right. So again, lots of different types of love, right? And you don't have to be the same in the way that you love. You just have to be compatible, right? And oftentimes that's something you can learn, or it might be something that just kind of happens naturally, but you might be different with different people, right? As we're kind of talking about here. And a big part of love, and this kind of takes a little bit of the romance out of it in a sense, right? Maybe not. But a big part of love is chemistry. There's a lot happening chemically when you fall in love with somebody, or in lust with somebody, or infatuation with somebody. When we meet someone that we're interested in, we have a lot of neurotransmitters and hormones that course through our system. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the biggest reasons why relationships end in like the 3 to 7 month range, and then again in the like 3-year range, has to do with chemicals. Our body can't produce the same amount of these chemicals anymore. And so they start to taper off and develop a tolerance. And if you don't know that or recognize that, it might come across to you as like, oh, I don't feel the same way about this person anymore. But a lot of that is actually chemical. And there are little things that you can do to kind of like play with that a little. But when we meet somebody and we're falling in love or infatuation with somebody, we have a lot of like norepinephrine or adrenaline that's coursing through our system. This causes us to have like that sweating, palms like sweating, your heart racing, dry mouth, butterflies in the stomach kind of feeling. All of that comes from norepinephrine. Right, so when we meet someone or when we're nervous or when we're excited, we get a lot of this stuff going on, but we get all of those kind of things. Butterflies in the stomach as a side note, and I'll go back to the other slide. This is a really common feeling that we get when we're nervous or we're excited. It's that like fluttery feeling in your stomach. Here, let me make it really unromantic for you. Ready? It's your intestines and the blood flow in your intestines pulling away to divert it somewhere else to fight or flight kind of reactions. Right? Butterflies in the stomach sounds much more like nice, right? Instead of digestion shutting down and that blood flow being rerouted somewhere else. But that's what's happening. It's a nervous response coming from your sympathetic nervous system related to things like adrenaline and cortisol. So when you have that big speech, right, you get butterflies in the stomach, you're nervous, you're ready for that fight, flight, freeze, fawn, like there's a lot of F's now, right, of how we respond to things. It's that fluttery feeling that we kind of equate to butterflies, but it's mainly norepinephrine and things like adrenaline and cortisol that are causing them.
Is that what, with the pubes and stuff?
Yeah.
I notice if I'm like anxious about something, like I like can't stomach food.
Totally. Yeah, because what happens is digestion requires a lot of energy by the body, right? And so there's a lot of blood flow to the intestines and so on. And when you're in that fight, flight, freeze, fawn, like kind of a sympathetic arousal level, all of that blood flow gets rerouted. So the intestines kind of shrink up. It can cause you to not feel super hungry or at least not be aware of it until later. Yeah, really interesting, right? And then that palms sweating and nervous and dry mouth, all that stuff that you get when you're anxious, whether it's love or something else, it's very directly related to norepinephrine. Again, it might take a little bit of the romance out of it, but it also helps to understand where these feelings are coming from. Dopamine is another really big one. Dopamine has a lot to do with like desire and pleasure, right? Dopamine has that like focused attention and desperation element that could come with it when it comes to love. So those feelings of like sleeplessness and focused energy on the person that you're in love with or infatuated with. We get a lot of serotonin. Serotonin is another really big like neurotransmitter that plays a role. Craving. When you're falling in love with someone, you crave them. You want to be around them. It's all that you think about, right? You like are obsessed with them in a way. Serotonin plays a big role in things like depression and obsessive compulsive disorder. When you are falling in love with someone, you have that obsessive thoughts, obsessive feelings. They're all you want to be with and all that you think about. So it's a big part of that infatuation. Phenylethylamine or PEA is another one here. This has a lot of like master elements to it. It's found in things like chocolate. And it's one of the reasons why we have things that we call aphrodisiacs, along with some other things that we'll talk about with that in another unit. But it's a very like common hormone playing a role in this process too. Yeah.
My partner has BPD.
Borderline personality disorder.
And he talks about how he gets very obsessed. What is the difference between like non-BPD obsession and BPD obsession?
Sure.
I'm just curious.
Yeah. So borderline personality disorder has this very like love-hate element to it. Sometimes we talk about something that's called splitting, which is obviously a little beyond like what we cover in here, but splitting is when you are very black and white about things. It's either one way or the other, and there's not a lot of like middle ground. And so what you tend to get a lot with borderline personality disorder is like obsessive, I need you, I can't live without you, you are my whole world, everything revolves around you. And it's like obsessive, perfect, you're everything, like up on a pedestal, right? And something really small happens, you don't return that text or phone call, or you have a little fight, I hate you, I know, can lead to some problems because both sides are so intense and there's not a lot of middle ground or like neutral. That's really common with BPD, that people struggle in relationships. And that one specifically is very connected to attachment. It's very likely that people, and it's common that people who have BPD had some relationship attachment issues as children, maybe abandonment issues, really common as well. And so it causes that kind of like schema in your mind that things are either one way or the other, and there's nothing in the middle, right? Really interesting. There's a book about it that's a great read. It's called I Hate You, Don't Leave Me, right? And it's really popular in the field of like BPD studies. I hate you, don't leave me. And it's that like, I hate you, I don't want to be anywhere around you, but please don't go. Like, I love you, you're everything, like come back. Very common with that. Yeah. Oxytocin. We've talked about oxytocin before. Oxytocin's like the cuddle hormone, right? It's released whenever you have physical contact with another person. It's released during orgasm. It's released during breastfeeding to help bonding between baby and mother, right? Or baby and caregiver. Very, very like big role. It can produce this like rush and feeling of connection. Endorphins as well, right? Endorphins are our body's like natural painkillers. So the idea here is that there's a lot of chemical stuff going on when we find somebody that we're infatuated with. And these are at a peak for like 3 to 7 months, and then they fall off. And I think knowing that and understanding that is helpful. I have a little video about this. This is one of like the leading experts in the field of like neurochemistry when it comes to love. Really interesting. She just kind of gives you a little bit more about all of these. So let me play it for you. So just kind of adding to what we were talking about, right? And she's one of the like leading experts in the field of this like neurochemistry of love, right? There's a lot of this that's really like, it's playing such a big role. And I know it seems unromantic to think about it that way, but this is what's going on in the beginning of a relationship. The longer that you've been together, the more this tapers off. And there's like a natural taper off point around like 3 to 7 months, another one around 3 years. Right? A lot of relationships break up at those points because it's either like, we'll commit and like, we're going to get married or commit to each other in some way, or maybe this is kind of falling off. There are things you can do to increase these. And I would argue that in a lot of relationships, it's important to find ways to increase these. I'm not saying that there's no passion when you've been together a long time. Everybody's different that way, but you can do things like create little rushes of these in things that you do on dates, right? Or things that you do together as a couple. In general, anything that's like a little bit scary is going to cause you to have rushes of all of these things. So like a roller coaster, for example, like, or a scary movie, or if it were a different time of year, like Halloween Horror Nights, right? Like something where you get like a little bit of a controlled scare, it creates a rush of some of these different things, and it can make you feel that kind of chemical connection again very quickly. So anything that's like a little bit like dangerous or exciting or thrilling, like even like I said, just like a scary movie, can trick your body into producing these. And some people, based on their attachment style, really interesting like research. There's one research study that was done on people who have a disorganized attachment style, saying that they tend to create these things more because they have fears of abandonment. That fear creates a little bit more of this, and they tend to have more passion than people who are more securely attached. Really interesting, like new like research. And I don't know, it can be problematic at times. You have somebody who's very securely attached and like these things fade. And then you have a partner who has these things like rushing still that can create a little bit of a disconnect, but it can also be kind of a powerful reconnection as well. So doing little things like that of like encouraging feelings of love through like rushes or things that are exciting, that have a little bit of an element of fear to them, but you know, under controlled circumstances. Any other like thoughts or comments, questions, anything else here, anything related to this? Okay. I have a little homework assignment for you, and it involves a song. So I'll play the song for you. And I'm so sorry for the song in some ways. If I get it stuck in your head, I apologize. Maybe it's not the end of the world. But there's a song that I think kind of highlights this really well, right? It's a Kesha song, right? It's that like your love is my drug, right? You're welcome or I'm sorry. I don't know, one or the other. So I'm gonna play this song for you, but let me give you the lyrics first. So what we'll do is you'll have a few minutes to start on this, but then you'll have to kind of finish it up on your own between now and when I see you next. But what I'm going to give you is just the lyrics to the song. And then on the back, there's some space for you to write some stuff. You can also just like underline lyrics and write it next to it if that's easier. So I'll give you a little bit of time to start this. We probably won't be working on it for the lyrics. But let me give you the lyrics. So as you're listening to the song, you're welcome to like underline things or kind of like write your thoughts. And then I'll give you a couple of minutes to kind of chat with a few people around you before we run out of time. And then I'll collect this next class. So just make sure you kind of finish up your thoughts after. And there are two sides to it right on the back. All right. Let me pause this. I hadn't seen it prior. I know. I'm sorry. You're welcome.
Oh, the lack of sleep.
So I don't remember what it did.
She's.
I guess this can be. I'm so lost without it. It's just about those. Oh, wait, is it? What is?
I like it. Oh, absolutely. I think they're gonna work with this also, so it's not- Okay, so happy to so the-
11 hours.
All of the. They all.
Yeah, sleep, we're sleeping.
Yeah.
Maybe I just need some sleep.
Oh, I know this.
I'm just. Oh, the meeting I was not TV where I found. I brought in. What was that? I mean, maybe I'll say yes. No, I'm leaving now. So. It's so old.
That's okay. This one's old too, right? Okay. Write it down. Disgusting.
Let's find out.
So just a couple more minutes, maybe like 2 more minutes. We'll wrap it up.
Well.
If we look at it.
Concentration.
Oh, concentration.
Yeah, that's for sure, like, I'm seeing, like.
And it doesn't have to be all of them.
Yeah, it's a rush.
Yeah. I think which fans? I'm like, wait, which secret were there? Wait, where are you?
The Russian.
Oh, they.
And then the effective, it's a crisis with the work. Yeah. But it's not. The thing is, if you got boy, yeah, it's hard. No, this is something really good.
All right, so just in the interest of time, I hope that you got a little bit of like a jump start with the people around you. So between now and when I see you on, when I see you on Monday, you'll bring this with you, we'll talk about it, I'll collect it from you. So make sure you finish this up over the weekend. And then again, I have a few extra copies of that quiz if you were interested and feeling like you want to do that. I have some up here. Otherwise, have a wonderful weekend. I'll see you all on Monday. You got this.